Hey, Randy Joe here, and this is 1001 Reviews, the series where I plan on reviewing every single album from the 1001 Albums to Listen to Before You Die book. And today we are looking at Dove's 2000 record, Lost Souls. Lost Souls was released by Doves in 2000 underneath the Heavenly label, produced by Doves themselves with Steve Osborne, art direction Rick Myers, nationality UK, with a running time of 59 minutes and 8 seconds, just shy of 1 hour. Now, Lost Souls by Doves remains a pretty low-key and underachieved record by most standards. Most people don't really know of this album or know of Doves at all. They're pretty unfamiliar, and I think on Spotify they're only reaching at about 800,000 monthly listeners, which isn't that much, especially considering they are in this book after all. But even still, this album here, Lost Souls, managed to feel like it was still very much ahead of its time when it was released in the year 2000, as most of this album feels like something that would be coming out in the mid-2000s rather than the early 2000s or 2000s on the dot in the turn of the century. Its overall style and mood feels like something that would come a lot stronger into effect in the mid-2000s rather than 2000 itself. It's a very well-produced, lavish, and cinematic album that feels very underappreciated and should be further looked at by those who seek this kind of style, because it manages to be quite consistent throughout its entire runtime. The opening track, Firesuite, is a purely instrumental track that really sets the tone for the whole album and shows off just how lavish and textured this album is going to be just by its instrumentals alone. It's really engaging and doesn't overstay its welcome, and it feels like a great taste of what's to come. And speaking of texturing in this album, the third song, Break Me Gently, has this vocoder-like effect added to the vocals. It's almost like an echoey effect, I would say, where it feels as if the vocals are cutting in and out alongside these very lavish and cinematic instrumentals, and really builds upon this moody aspect. It's a very mystical and ethereal track, and I feel like this is just one of Dove's best songs on here, but definitely isn't the best, because in my opinion, one of the best, and maybe the best in general, is the title track, Lost Souls. It is one of the longest tracks on the album, the second longest actually, and it just surpasses the 6-minute mark, but feels really reminiscent of a lot of things that are around now, or a lot of things that were just coming out not long after this song. For example, I would argue that the comparison could be made here between this track, Lost Souls, and a lot of Joji's work today, because the styles and the mood here is very similar, especially in the vocal elements of this track. Another really fair comparison I would make for this song and overall this entire album is the comparison to Radiohead, because to me this album feels as if it was the album that Radiohead would have made if they continued on the trajectory after the Bends rather than going the more electronic route that they went with OK Computer onwards. I really like this title track especially because, again, it never feels boring and it never really fails to add more to the textures. It's always adding something to the mix, and the volume of it overall is just quite strong and consistent all the way through its 6-minute runtime. But I can't really say that for this entire album. I can't say that all of this feels that original or that great or grand in an overall scheme of things. Catch the Sun especially is a track that I would say really feels like the worst aspects of 2000s rock music in the alternative genre, because it just feels quite boring and uninteresting throughout its entire runtime, not adding anything, and in fact kind of drops all sense of texture and style and mood that so much of this album had so far. Especially vocally, the delivery is really one note and simplistic. There's nothing great to the vocals here, just as there's nothing great to the instrumentals here. It feels like it was focusing way too much on a radio-centric side of things. Another weak track, in my opinion, is the song Melody Calls, which feels like a Beatles tribute, but instead kind of feels more as if it was going for a bad Beatles imitation rather than a tribute track. There's also the song The Man Who Told Everything, which, for me, has a great concept. A song that is about a man who is completely spilling the beans to the world and is spilling his truth. He's no longer lying about who he is as a person, but instead is kind of laying all the cards to bear and is just saying all his truths to the entire world and just letting it be known who he is. Almost taking on a complete freedom-like approach as he embraces the person he is rather than hides it and shields it away from the world. The title of this track is also an allusion to The Man Who Sold the World by David Bowie, which is a kind of interesting contrast, as that song is more about a man who is kind of secretive and is definitely got all the cards in hand, whereas this is the opposite, a man who is laying all the cards for the world to see. Unfortunately, this track instrumentally and again vocally isn't that great and feels really uninteresting straight through. The concept does manage to carry most of this track for me personally. And then finally, I want to mention the longest track on here, The Cedar Room, which is just shy of 8 minutes and is a overall pretty great song, because over the course of its 8 minutes, again, like the best parts of this album, it adds in these really rich and strong textures. It is constantly layering over and over again itself, sort of like waves kind of coming over into the fold, and they overlap quite a bit. It's a very multi-segment like track, as a lot of it could be broken down into separate components, but together make a much stronger whole. And I think that really helps in padding out the 8 minutes with something that is more interesting rather than something that would be filler and one note. Overall, I would say that this album is just a great and fantastic album to listen to if you're going for a solo walk. It feels very personal and very close to the listener in general, not something you would listen to in a wider audience. I'd also say it would be a great, fantastic album to listen to in like the midnight hours, in the middle of the night, because it has a very dark and moody aspect that really feels as if you are basking in this sense of loneliness, but also feels quite euphoric at the same time. It is just a very uplifting yet moody album to enjoy and listen to. The soft rating of this album for me came to a 6.9 out of 10, but I will go ahead and harden it up to a 7 out of 10. It is a 7 out of 10 for me, and of course, with that being said, I would say this isn't necessarily essential, so it gets a not essential. And even though I would say not essential, I would say if you do like cinematic albums and you do like a dream pop sort of focus, something that's sort of ethereal and almost heavenly in a way, you might really enjoy this album because it has that sort of strong appeal to it. And like I said, if you also like albums that feel as if they are focused in the midnight hour, something you would listen to kind of on your own in a secluded sort of mindset, then again, this is a pretty strong album for that. I would also recommend this to people who just enjoy a lot of Radiohead or albums that are similar to Radiohead, as this does have a sort of similar sense of tone and style. But for me, overall, I would say it's not essential. You don't need to listen to it before you die, because I really didn't leave this album feeling like I was absolutely blown away by what I was hearing, and really I could have gone without hearing it and I wouldn't have been that upset by it if I knew that this album existed, I'd say. Anyways, that pretty much does it for this review. Let's go ahead and see what the next album to listen to is in the 1001 Albums to Listen to Before You Die book. Alright, random number generator, 1 to 1001, generate on Google. 142 is the next album, which is 142 being Johnny Cash's 1969 album, At San Quentin. So go ahead and listen to Johnny Cash's At San Quentin, and I'll review that in exactly 1 week from now. Anyways, that pretty much does it for this video. If you liked the video, please hit like and subscribe if you want to follow along in listening to every single album from the 1001 Albums to Listen to Before You Die book. And as always, my name is Randy Joe, signing off.